and welcome to Encouraging Others in Loving Jesus. I'm your host, Kim Smith. This is episode 325. Now, how many steps ahead is God? I don't know about you, but as I look back on my life, there are seasons that were very difficult, and the temptation was to wonder. I didn't really wonder if God was paying attention. I won't go that far, but the temptation to help God, quote unquote, was really strong. I've already posted our weekly engagement feature, and I'm going to read that because I'm going to start out with one of my own personal testimonials as we go into today's story from God's Word. So, our question is, what is one of your testimonials regarding a time the Lord was working on your behalf, but you were unaware? So, I've mentioned part of this at some point, but I have no idea when it was. It's now, this is the 10-year anniversary. It was almost 10 years ago when I knew that God was leading me away from a job that I had had for about 12 years. And it was tough because there was so much of my identity and relationships tied up with that company. There's no question about that. But I knew that God was shutting that door. And right after he made it crystal clear to me, then I saw exactly what was happening. And so I presented my 2 weeks notice without any idea, none whatsoever idea of what door God would be opening. Because with what I do, my main job title anyway, there aren't a whole lot of those positions in a full-time way. Like, it's one of those job titles that gets stuck on other titles as an add-on job. But rarely does a company invest and have that as a full-time position. But that really wasn't what I was pondering at that moment. I just knew God was telling me it was time to go. And I remember someone from my job just looking at me, and she's like, "You have no idea what job you're going to do?" And I'm like, "Nope." "And you're trusting God to lead you?" "Yes, ma'am." I mean, she was blown away. And the first couple of weeks, it was the emotion of saying all the goodbyes. And then that door shut. And there was no obvious open door. And then I was walking through my local Walmart. I got a phone call from a former coworker and told me about a job that was available in the area at a company that I had heard the name but didn't know anything about. And it was for a position like what I wanted. And so I applied, not realizing I knew anybody in that organization. And I called, as you should, to follow up to make sure they got my application. And whoever answered the phone said, "Oh, yes, we've got it." And we get to about 3 weeks out, and my nerves are pinging everywhere because I don't have unlimited wealth to fall back on. And I felt God tugging on me to, like, inquire of somebody who I had by that point figured out that I knew that was inside that company. And they started pinging some doors that I didn't even know existed at the time. And when it was all said and done, I had a phone interview walking around somewhere on the seminary campus and ended up with that job. My favorite part of the whole story, because there are so many ways where God was working, but I had no clue. But my favorite was the fact that when I spoke with the personnel person, they said my application was nowhere. They had gone through everybody in the system and had already interviewed and had already made their selection, but just had not made an offer to the person. And mine appeared. Now, I had submitted it weeks before, and it appears. But on top of that, after I took the job, I found out multiple different places where God had put people that I knew in the path of those who would be in this other organization. One, for instance, was at a restaurant. Now, how in the world my name even came up, I do not know. Thinking about it, I have no idea how my name came up. But it was people that I had known, and my prospective employer who I didn't know anything about except for their name. And a conversation was had about me. I learned all of this later, and I caught flies with my mouth because I was just like, in the midst of my anxiety, where I was so tempted to try to, quote, help God, unquote, God was working all things out. So when has that happened for you? In today's story, we're going to talk about a person that we have spoken about one time before. And that is is referred to usually in the Bible is the Shunammite woman. So do you remember the story about Elisha and the poor widow? And then after that, we have Elisha and the woman from Shunem. And the prophet Elisha was traveling. He was going up and down the roads, and this wealthy woman set aside room in her home to take care of Elisha and his servant as they traveled, to make things easier on him. And so I've got to read the story that we went over 2 or 3 months ago in order to set up our text for today, because I'm not going to count on my memory or yours to help us know exactly how big of a deal this was. So main characters, you've got Elisha, who is the prophet of God. You have Gehazi, who is his servant. And you have the wealthy woman from Shunem and her husband, who really just gets an honorable mention. And you have her son. At least that's who we've got in this verse. So if you will go to 2 Kings 4, 8 through 37. And I'm going to read through this quickly. I'm not going to comment on it. I'm going to read through it quickly because our main text is 2 Kings 8, 1 through 6. So let's go. One day Elisha went to the town of Shunem. A wealthy woman lived there, and she urged him to come to her home for a meal. After that, whenever he passed that way, he would stop there for something to eat. She said to her husband, "I am sure this man who stops in from time to time is a holy man of God. Let's build a small room for him on the roof and furnish it with a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp. Then he will have a place to stay whenever he comes by." One day Elisha returned to Shunem, and he went up to this upper room to rest. He said to his servant Gehazi, "Tell the woman from Shunem, I want to speak to her." When she appeared, Elisha said to Gehazi, "Tell her, we appreciate the kind concern you have shown us. What can we do for you? Can we put in a good word for you to the king or to the commander of the army?" "No," she replied, "my family takes good care of me." Later, Elisha asked Gehazi, "What can we do for her?" Gehazi replied, "She doesn't have a son, and her husband is an old man." "Call her back again," Elisha told him. When the woman returned, Elisha said to her as she stood in the doorway, "Next year at this time you will be holding a son in your arms." "No, my lord," she cried. "Oh, man of God, don't deceive me and get my hopes up like that." But sure enough, the woman soon became pregnant, and at that time the following year she had a son, just as Elisha had said. One day when her child was older, he went out to help his father, who was working with the harvester. Suddenly he cried out, "My head hurts, my head hurts." His father said to one of the servants, "Carry him to his mother." So the servant took him home, and his mother held him on her lap, but around noontime he died. She carried him up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, then shut the door and left him there. She sent a message to her husband, "Send one of the servants and a donkey so that I can hurry to the man of God and come right back." "Why go today?" he asked. It is neither a new moon festival nor a Sabbath." But she said, "It will be all right." So she saddled the donkey and said to the servant, "Hurry, don't slow down unless I tell you to." As she approached the man of God at Mount Carmel, Elisha saw her in the distance. He said to Gehazi, "Look, the woman from Shunem is coming. Run out to meet her and ask her, 'Is everything all right with you, your husband, and your child?'" "Yes," the woman told Gehazi, "everything is fine." But when she came to the man of God at the mountain, she fell to the ground before him and caught hold of his feet. Gehazi began to push her away, but the man of God said, "Leave her alone. She is deeply troubled, but the Lord has not told me what it is." Then she said, "Did I ask you for a son, my lord? And didn't I say, 'Don't deceive me and get my hopes up'?" Then Elisha said to Gehazi, "Get ready to travel. Take my staff and go. Don't talk to anyone along the way. Go quickly and lay the staff on the child's face." But the boy's mother said, "As surely as the Lord lives and you yourself live, I won't go home unless you go with me." So Elisha returned with her. Gehazi hurried on ahead, laid the staff on the child's face, but nothing happened. There was no sign of life. He returned to meet Elisha and told him, "The child is still dead." When Elisha arrived, the child was indeed dead, lying there on the prophet's bed. He went in alone and shut the door behind him and prayed to the Lord. Then he lay down on the child's body, placing his mouth on the child's mouth, his eyes on the child's eyes, and his hands on the child's hands. And as he stretched out on him, the child's body began to grow warm again. Elisha got up, walked back and forth across the room once, then stretched himself out again on the child. This time the boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Then Elisha summoned Gehazi. "Call the child's mother," he said. And when she came in, Elisha said, "Here, take your son." She fell at his feet and bowed before him, overwhelmed with gratitude. Then she took her son in her arms and carried him downstairs. What a story. And we went over that again a few months ago. We talked about that story. And we haven't talked about the woman from Shunem since then. We've talked about Elisha a lot because at every turn God was doing a miracle, whether it was a miracle of him getting the poison out of the pot, or it was just the plain miracle that God just kept giving him the inside scoop. And that was on the daily, it seemed like. And then we get to 2 Kings 8. And this is a shorter text. And we start in with verse 1. It says, Elisha had told the woman whose son he had brought back to life, "Take your family and move to some other place, for the Lord has called for a famine on Israel. This will last for 7 years." So over the last, 2 to 3 weeks on the podcast, we've been talking about the famine. and just how bad it was on the people of Israel and just how desperate the situation. Last week, we saw that Elisha had made a prediction, and it wasn't believed that things were going to get better the next day, but they did get better the next day. And then we pop in here about another famine story. And so Elisha had told the woman from Shunem, take your family, in other words, get out of Dodge because there's going to be a famine for 7 years. Verse 2, so the woman did as the man of God instructed. She took her family and settled in the land of the Philistines for 7 years. It's surely a shame she went to the Philistines, but that was just like their neighbors. And even though they were rivals at that point, that the main rivalry was not the focus as much as the Aramean armies. If you remember, back in the time of David, the Philistines were the main enemies. Verse 3, after the famine ended, she returned from the land of the Philistines, and she went to see the king about getting back her house and her land. As she came in, the king was talking with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God. The king had just said, tell me some stories about the great things Elisha has done. And Gehazi was telling the king about the time Elisha had brought a boy back to life. At that very moment, the mother of the boy walked in to make her appeal to the king about her house and land. Look, my lord the king, Gehazi exclaimed, here is the woman now, and this is her son, the very one Elisha brought back to life. Is this true? The king asked her, and she told him the story. So he directed one of his officials to see that everything she had lost was restored to her, including the value of any crops that had been harvested during her absence. Is that not an incredible story? She walks in 7 years after she has left the land, and God, in his providence, has the king and Gehazi talking about her story in a perfect entry point for her to come in and ask for her land back. The other story that I automatically thought of that I'm definitely not going to read, but it's a story that if we keep going with this podcast for years and years and years, we'll eventually get to the book of Esther. And it has one of those stories in it where things are looking really, really bad for Mordecai and for the Israelites. And then God causes the king to have insomnia, and as he has insomnia, he asks for the history books to be read. And in the midst of that, he hears how he never celebrated Mordecai for what he had done, and everything literally changed as a result. And that was not just coincidental insomnia that happened, or not only just the insomnia, but him going, would you please read the records of the king? Like, God orchestrated every bit of that. And then you look at the New Testament, and you look at the story of Jesus and how that Jesus told his disciples to go ahead and they would find a donkey and like where it would be, and all the different times where Jesus knew. And the details had already been taken care of ahead of time. And so, in your life, what is one of your testimonials regarding a time the Lord was working on your behalf, but you were unaware? At least unaware at that time. Like, when have you been able to look back? Somebody comes up and tells you a story of what was going on in the backside, that you never had a clue. I would love for you to share that with us. You can send me an email at encouragingotherinlovingjesus@gmail.com. You can put it in the Facebook group, Encouraging Others in Loving Jesus. Like, there are multiple different ways, but I would love to hear your stories, because when we tell our stories, it encourages others. Does this story not encourage you to trust God even when you do not see His hand at work? As many of you know, one of my favorite verses in all of Scripture is Exodus 14:14. The Lord Himself fights for you. Just stay calm, or just be still. And that is really tough to do when you feel like you should be doing something to, quote, help God. But stories like this are a great reminder that God doesn't need our help. God wants our obedience, and He will take care of guiding our steps. So, thank you so much for tuning in. You can go to the very bottom of the show notes and scan the QR code to get all 325 episodes of this podcast. I would really love for you to review the podcast on whatever platform you're listening. It would be so very helpful. I could be like some of the other podcasters and say, make sure you rate us a 5. No, I want your honest answer. Like, is this podcast making a difference? Is it causing you to grow in your walk with Christ? Is it encouraging you to love Jesus more? If not, I'm not doing what the Lord has called me to do. But I'm giving it my all, but I would love to hear from you. And do remember that it's free for you to listen to, and it's free for you to share with others. And so, like, just snapping a little click and sending it to somebody and saying, hey, this story could be such an encouragement to you. You're not sure that God's really paying attention. And this might be a good reminder to you that God is into the details, and it's oftentimes in the hindsight that we see that His hand was moving the entire time. So, thank you so much, and just remember, it's always a trust and obey kind of day.